All right, as I just said, it's about using the tools that you have. Last week I talked about cranberry farming quite a bit, and I don't want to spend as much time on that today, even though you've got a nice picture up there of cranberries floating in a bog. And that piece of tool, that's there, that piece of wood that you see in the picture, is called a paddle. For those of you who have never harvested cranberries, that is a paddle. And you can't tell from looking at the picture, but if the person who built the paddle did it correctly, there is a very slight slant to the paddle. If it's one way, you can push the berries. But if you try to pull it, it goes under the water. So you have to flip it over. But then you can pull berries. And so sometimes you're pushing and sometimes you're pulling, but you're not moving berries without the paddle. I mean, there's other tools that we use. Sometimes we use a leaf blower. It doesn't really work, but my boss thinks it does, so he sprays us with water. That's what he does. But the paddle, remember I mentioned last week, there's the person who's doing the boom boards. You don't even start working boom without a paddle in your hand. You have to have your paddle. The elevator operator has a paddle. Everybody pulling boom has a paddle. People working the bank have a paddle. Literally every single person out there has a paddle until you're raking leaf or working the truck. And actually working the truck, you also have a paddle, but it's a different paddle that is flat because you're only pulling so that you can level berries. There's still a paddle. But we use the tools that we have. I told you last week that we were going to be looking at doing church different today. And I also told you not to panic. We're not going to be snatching out the pews. We're not changing service to Saturday morning or anything like that. In fact, this isn't really about what's going on inside the church at all. In fact, we're not talking about his house today. We're going to be talking an awful lot about your house. And to start, I want you to go ahead and grab your Bible. And we're going to the book of Luke for a parable that is going to make probably 0 sense as you consider what we're talking about today, at least initially. But to start, we're in Luke 16. I'm starting in verse 1. Jesus told this story to his disciples. All right, let's pause there. Who's telling the story? Jesus. All right. Who's he telling it to? Disciples. All right. So Jesus is telling the story, and he's telling it to his disciples. If you consider yourself a follower of Christ, Jesus is talking to you. There was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. One day, a report came that the manager was wasting his employer's money. So the employer called him in and said, "What's this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you're going to be fired." The manager thought to himself, "Now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength to dig ditches and I'm too proud to beg. I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I am fired." So he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe him?" The man replied, "I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil." How did that debt come into being? 800 gallons of olive oil? That's a lot of olive oil. So the manager told him, "Take the bill and quickly change it to 400 gallons. "How much do you owe my employer?" he asked the next man. "I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat," was the reply. "Here," the manager said, "take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And it's true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of the light. Yeah, I see the look on your faces. What, Pastor? What in the world are we talking about? What does this have to do with anything? And I know initially you probably think that it doesn't, but it actually really will when we get to the heart of the matter today. Jesus tells this story about a lazy employee. This man has a job to do. He's supposed to be a manager. There's a wealthy individual who has hired him to take care of his affairs. And he's not really doing that. So the boss calls him in and he says, "Hey, slacker, what's this I hear about you? Yeah, you're about to be fired." And so the lazy man looks at his situation and he basically comes to the conclusion, I've got a choice to make. Digging ditches, not for me. Can't do that. And I'm too proud to beg. So I've got to come up with a plan. So when he's faced with termination, like his job is about to end, and he realizes he's going to be out on his butt, he comes up with this solution. I am going to make friends and influence people. Then, when I lose my job and the regular paycheck stops coming in, I'm going to have somebody I can rely on. I want to point out two things here. First, the lazy manager is building a safety net. He knows he's about to fall. He knows it's over. The job is done. What am I going to do next? And he has just enough time to get his affairs in order. So fortunately for him, his boss gave him just enough grace to take care of business. But I also want to point this out. Here's my second point. The lazy manager, he suddenly looks a lot less lazy in the second part of the story, doesn't he? I mean, initially, what's he doing? Initially, he's just living off the boss's paycheck. Boss gives him money. What's he do with it? Nothing. He's just sitting around. He's not taking care of what he's supposed to be taking care of. He's lazy and he's dishonest. But when he's faced with life change, hey, you're about to lose your job. You don't get to live fat and happy anymore. He suddenly finds motivation. I guess the thought of digging ditches and begging helped him discover that he really was capable of working. So I want to ask you a question, and I'm serious about this. What motivates you? What really motivates you? Is it financial? You're willing to work as long as you can avoid hunger? I would like to work. I like work because I like to eat. Maybe that is a motivating factor for you. Is it recognition? You like the awards and the accolades. We got Kathy shaking her head. No, that's not me. But you know, that really is it for some people. It's all tied to the way that we receive love. Some people, they receive love with words. And so being told, you have done this great thing. Someone speaks a kindness to you. Hey, you did a great job. Especially if there's details. This thing you did this well. That matters to some people. Maybe you're one of those who receiving some kind of recognition helps you feel like you accomplished something. Maybe it's time off. Wait, I'm motivated to be lazy? No. But for some people, working gives them then a sense of satisfaction and, again, financial compensation so that they're able to go out and see the world, travel, experience. They live for the time off because they know it's going to help them grow, help them develop, help them be bigger and better as they see the world. So I ask you, what is your motivation? What gets you going? Oh no, Pastor, it's not that at all. I do everything as unto the Lord. And that can absolutely be something that motivates you, and it should be how we do all of our work. But for some people, that may also be their motivation. That they look at their job, every aspect of their job, and they say, I got to do this for God. Well, I would encourage you to take that lens and apply it to every area of your life. And live your life in such a way that everything that you're doing is as unto the Lord. And I also want you to consider your tools. We're going to get to that in just a minute. Now, according to Jesus, though, this is what we need to learn from the story of our newly motivated manager. He says in verse 9, here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Hold on. What's the lesson? That we're supposed to use our worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. How many of you, quick show of hands, have heard this particular sermon preached before? You're supposed to use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends? But this is what Jesus said. And I want you to look at the why. They will welcome you to an eternal home. Jesus wants us to use our worldly resources to make friends and influence people, so they will go to heaven. And then they'll be really glad that you helped pay their way to get there. Now, I'm oversimplifying this. This is not purgatory. We're not paying our way out of something. Instead, what you have is people are thankful that you used what you had to help them get to a place where they came to the knowledge of the truth, where they understood what was going on. That's what Jesus is saying here. Pastor Wade, you're telling us that we're supposed to use our worldly resources to influence people. That sounds kind of shady. It's not shady. It's shrewd. And Jesus said, and it is true, that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of the light. Guys, Jesus is straight up telling us that the world is doing a better job using its physical wealth and its resources to influence people than are the children of the light. Do you not see that? Look at how much energy, time, money, tools, media platforms, advertising, cultural influence. How much is the world pouring into trying to make disciples of the world? The world is trying to grow the world, and it's using what it has at its disposal. And so you are constantly bombarded with messages that say, act like the world. Do you not see that? The world wants the world to act like the rest of the world. And so what does it call you if you try to do something different? Weirdo. You're different. You're bizarre. You're strange. We don't want to be like you. And so you get made fun of for trying to act like Jesus said act. And yet the world tells you, act like us and be normal. Now here's what normal looks like. And what do they give you? A presentation that is nothing more than contradiction to Scripture and sin. It says, this is normal. This is the way you should be. This is who you really are. But yet everything in there is a contradiction to who God has called you to be. Jesus is telling us to find our motivation like the once lazy manager, and then get to work. We have a job to go make disciples. And now he's telling us, make friends, influence people, use the resources that you have on hand. And then he goes further to say this about our resources, verse 10. If you are faithful in little things, you'll be faithful in large ones. But if you're dishonest in the little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? If you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? Well, initially, the guy in our story, our lazy manager, initially he couldn't be trusted. That's why he's being fired. We couldn't trust him to do a good job. But then he finds his motivation. He didn't want to dig ditches. And then, look back at what Jesus said. The rich man, his boss, had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. God actually expects us to be trustworthy from the beginning. And that's with everything that we have. That's why Jesus continues. He says, no one can serve two masters. For you will hate one and love the other. You'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. You've probably heard that preached a lot, right? But I want you to consider it differently. What God's saying is, don't be like the lazy manager. See, when he was getting paid to do nothing, he's just living fat and happy. I'm content. I got what I need. I'll get to the boss's stuff later. But the problem is he kept pushing the boss's stuff off. And what Scripture's saying here is that you have resources. What are you doing with them? Are you just sitting on your resources? I'll get to the boss's stuff later. Oh, I hope we're not being lazy managers. Because you've been given resources. And now there's an expectation. What are you doing with those resources? Are you using them appropriately, or are you sitting there fat and happy? Maybe it's better asked this way. Are you making your worldly resources work for you? Or are you making your worldly resources work for the kingdom? I want to talk for a minute about this. The platform? No, just church. Church in general. We do have some instructions in Scripture about how to have orderly services. Some things that are okay to do in church, some things that are not. And we were talking about one of them a minute ago. One of the aspects of communion. The instruction in Corinth was you had people who were coming to church on time because they were affluent. There was nothing that was causing them to be late to church. And they were wanting to get started with the meal, the fellowship part. But the way that they had it set up is that they were starting with communion. Can we just check the box and move on? And that's where Paul's rebuke came in. Because they were wanting to just move on. And so, throughout Scripture, like I said, there's these little instructions that we get. Wait for everybody to show up. Do this thing together. He talks about when it's okay to eat. What's okay to eat? Food that was previously served to idols and false gods, can we eat that? But we don't have laid out step-by-step instructions for how to do church in the New Testament. It's just not what we have. And the early church was an absolute hodgepodge of services and traditions that have all had some impact on how we do church. People get really messed up about what church is supposed to look like. But it wasn't the same for every place. And a lot of it had to do with how your church got established. For example, Paul, his ministry to Western Asia and Southern Europe, they kind of did things one way based on how Paul showed them how to do it as he traveled through. The church in Jerusalem that was led by Peter, they kind of did things similar, which is kind of how Paul got started on his. And they were pulling their traditions from the traditions of the Hebrew faith. So, there was corporate prayer. We have corporate prayer. There were songs of worship and celebration. We have songs of worship and celebration. They had teaching. Sometimes it came from the Old Testament. Sometimes it came from the letters of the apostles, what we now call the epistles. Hey, that's what we do. And then they oftentimes had prophets or preachers who would make plain the Word of God. Oh, you mean they preached? Yeah. Well, if we really look at it, that's not much different than how we do things now. There was also a focus on caring for the poor. They would do that by caring for the poor within their body. There were deacons who were assigned to make sure that widows and orphans and those who were unable to work had food, clothing. Some congregations were permitted to meet in borrowed temples and tabernacles. Their location probably looked a lot like ours, but most were not. Most met in homes. They shared a potluck style meal. That was typically how they did it. Everybody brought what they had, what they could bring to church, and they took communion. Some met on Friday evening, but most met on Sunday. And they had their fellowship to remember the resurrection of the Lord, and they would break bread and have fellowship. We don't have a potluck every week. We don't have communion every week. But we have our traditions. We like to fellowship. We like to break out the grill and have parties in the back, right? I think what we have works pretty well. Occasionally, we have to miss church for a variety of reasons. My buddy Kenny's out today because he's not feeling well. Sometimes we have to work. Ooh, horrible, horrible, horrible sin to have to work on your... Is it? Because sometimes you got to get your ox out of the ditch. And we live in a culture that has weekends, but we're also in a tourist community, and sometimes you got to keep the store open. So the boss says, I need you to come in. But for right now, I want you to go back to the lazy manager. Go back to when he was lazy. He had resources, but he wasn't utilizing them according to the will of his boss. He was sitting there fat and happy. We have resources. Most of you have a place to live. Most of you have a car. Most of you have food and you were able to pay for it. Most of you are paying your bills. Sometimes that's tight, but if that's the case, I would encourage you to take a very critical look at your physical assets. Take stock. What do you really have? What are the tangible assets in your possession? And are you using them as the boss intended for you to be using them? If your resources are stretched so thin that you're not sure, maybe you need to reevaluate your situation. It might mean changing jobs. It might mean changing locations. It might mean prioritizing, budgeting, getting rid of debt. You mean I have to do Dave Ramsey stuff? Valuable tool. But you need to do what you need to do to make sure that the resources that you have, that the Lord has given you, are being used according to His will and not your own. You can't be sitting there like the lazy manager, fat and happy, doing nothing, when the boss gave you something He's expecting you to put to work. What you do with your money and your physical possessions absolutely matters to God. There is a real purpose. For no one can serve two masters. For you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Right now, I want you to consider your other resources. Not just your money and not just your possessions. Right now, I'd like you to also consider your time. Hey, time's a resource? Yeah, absolutely, time's a resource. So, how many days are in a week?
5.
How many days are in a week? 7. And how many of those do we typically come here? 1. How many hours are in a day? 24. How many of those do we typically spend here? A couple. Oh, it's okay, Pastor, because when I'm at home, I spend all my time with the Lord. I read my Bible all the time. I pray. I talk to Jesus. That's good news. I'm glad that you're spending time in personal devotion with the Lord, that you are seeking to get closer to Him, and that you are in communication with Him so that the Holy Spirit can instruct you in the daily operation of your life. Not just the path set before you, but also the distant future where you can see and know the plans that He has for you. I'm not belittling that at all. Please don't think that I am. But what about the time? Are you doing it to just get fat and happy? Or are you really utilizing the tools that have been given to you for the kingdom of God? See, we all have work to do. We talked about it last week. The whole Great Commission thing. We have a responsibility. How much of your time is really spent working for the kingdom and not just devouring the Word for your own personal use? Wait, Pastor, are you saying reading the Bible is a bad thing? Not at all. But if the only thing you're doing is reading the Bible so that you can have more knowledge of the Bible, and you're not utilizing that knowledge to deliver the gospel to the people who need to hear it, then you're probably a whole lot like the lazy manager, whether you want to hear that or not. You're sitting there fat and happy, but you're not making friends, and you're not influencing people. I've used this analogy before, but I'm going to use it again. Consider your kitchen table. It's a resource. Mine is currently 1/3 desk, 2/3 card-making craft center. In a little tiny corner for junk mail. But how powerful an asset could your kitchen table be if you were utilizing that to bring individuals who had questions about faith and letting them ask them there? How many of you used to come to flame services? How many of you have been to a flame service? What do? We ask questions, we answer them, right? Why can't your kitchen table be used as a flame service? Once a week, twice a month, once a month. You're using the resource of time and kitchen table and food to let your unchurched friends have a safe place to ask their questions. It's kind of hard to ask questions in this environment. Honestly, I don't mind if you do, but it makes it a little hard for the people who are watching online because they can barely hear me. I don't think they can hear you asking your questions, so it makes it tough. So we'll do that tonight at 4:30, a Bible study. Bring your questions about the last 3 chapters of the book of John. It's a great time to do that. But so is using your kitchen table to let your unchurched friends ask questions about faith. Well, Pastor, I might not know all the answers. Nobody expects you to. Look them up together, learn together, study God's Word together. And you're using the resource you have the way the boss intended. Well, Pastor, I don't have all those good food cooking skills like you do. I mean, the food you make is legendary, Pastor, but I can't cook like you. It's all right. Got hot dogs, right? Don't boil them, bake them. I mean, stick them on the grill if you got a grill, but I don't know what resources are available to you. But what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be fancy. I know some of you don't like hot dogs, and it's okay. The Lord can forgive you. But it's a resource that you can use that's not an expensive one. And then your friend who's coming, maybe they bring the chips or the drinks or salad. And so it becomes church. Doing church different is having church at your kitchen table. Well, Pastor, I don't want to cook food for people. That's all right. What tools do you have? How about a deck of cards? Well, I like to pay cards, Pastor. I don't. But you have a resource because there's other people that do. And you can use that to let people come in, sit around your now card table. It's not a kitchen table anymore. Now it's a card table. And while you play games, you let them ask their questions about faith. Could your car be used for the kingdom? What about your golf clubs or your fishing rod? What about your puppies? Can that be used for the kingdom? Absolutely. Every resource that we have, we can set before the Lord. What about your garden? And I'm not talking about the vegetables that it produces. I'm talking about that little place, that piece of land. Could that be used for a student to come in who's hurting? To be able to ask their questions and say, hey, this hurts. Can you explain why? And it's not about how much zucchini you grow. It's not about your mother's tea set. It's not about your back porch. But how you could use that lovely view to provide a peaceful atmosphere so that people ask their questions about faith. So they sit and have a warm drink where they feel comforted while you use your mom's tea set for your unchurched friends to make a connection to the Lord. You guys, it really comes down to this. The lazy manager had to wait until he was threatened with termination before he got motivated. What if instead it wasn't about self-preservation, it was about eternal preservation? Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. In closing today, I actually have one more thing. This chart, some of you may have seen it. It's been made popular in recent weeks. And there was an organization, a faith-based organization, in the spring of 2024, they looked at how people began attending church. I want you to start at the bottom. Advertising. 2% all of the money, I'm talking about the church, not New Life Church, because we certainly don't spend that much on advertising. But advertising, the church as a whole, we're pouring money into social media, websites, radio ads, little tiny signs that we put all the way down the highway. We spend all that money, and 2% of people come in. How about your pastor invited you? 6%. And that's for churches with extroverted pastors who know how to talk to people. You guys are stuck with me. Does that answer your question, kid? Now you know. Because I doubt it's 6%. Then there's my personal favorite, organized visitation. We don't have that 6% because I don't even know what that is. I think it's what the Baptists do in the South, where they all come to your house after you came to visit one time. And they're like, are you coming back next week? Are you? Next week, we need you. Are you coming? If you're not, you're going to go to hell. We're sorry. It's just the rules. I'm not sure. I love you, my Baptist friends. I'm just teasing you. I love you very much, all of you. And I'm glad we're part of the kingdom together, because you guys love to go and take the gospel to people, and that's really important. And if that's what organized visitation is, then by all means take the gospel and get out there, because that's another 6%. But what about the 86%? The last one that's up there. 86% of people start attending church because their friends invited them. And we already talked about me. I don't have any friends. But some of you do. Well, you're my friend, Ken. You are. I don't have very many friends. Nobody likes me. Sandria barely likes me. That's not true. Sandria loves me very much, and I love her. Oh, you guys know she's been loving me a long time. This week, she will have been married to me for 25 years. Oh, my. I didn't do that so you would clap, but yes, thank you for thanking her for loving me for that long, because I appreciate it very much.
She needs all the encouragement she can get.
Amen. Amen. Because I'm telling you, it ain't 6%. But guys, look, 86% of people are coming into church because a friend invited them. And that goes back to you doing your work out there. It's about using your kitchen table, your golf clubs, your shotgun, your fishing pole, your woodworking table, your deck of cards, your card making stuff, your beagle. I'm serious, guys. It's about using the resources that you have to make friends and influence people. That sounds shady, Pastor. No, it's shrewd. It's using what you have to advance the purposes of the kingdom. And wouldn't you be glad if somebody used their money to make sure that you knew how to come to faith in Christ? That's what this comes down to. So that when we get to heaven, people go, hey, you're the one. There you are. I'm so glad you're here. I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate you using the resources you had to make sure I got here. That's what Jesus told us to do. That's the point of the parable. Yeah. Last week we talked about harvesting and planting. Sometimes you will harvest what you did not plant. Someone else will have done the work for you. But sometimes you're going to plant the seed, or you're going to prepare the ground. You're going to plant the seed. You're going to weed the garden. You're going to apply the fertilizer. You're going to cut that fruit with your own snippy clippies, and you're going to be the one who puts it in the basket. I mean, that's how gardening works, right? Sometimes you will harvest exactly what you took from beginning to end. The time that you spend at your dinner table talking with somebody about the kingdom of God could very well lead to converts for the kingdom. And 86% of the time, it could also include people being part of your fellowship. I shouldn't say that way. 86% of the people coming in, it's because of those friendships, those connections, those relationships. Please do not squander the resources that the Lord gave you to live comfortably. Use your resources to benefit others and make friends eternally. I've gone very long. Most of you are bored out of your minds. But I hope that you're hearing this message. Because this parable that the boss gave us about a lazy manager is intended to motivate all of us to not be lazy managers. Use the tools that the Lord gave you. Get out there, make friends, and influence people. And with that, we're going to turn off the video. Thank you so much. Those of you who were with us this week, look forward to seeing you next week as we're going in a completely different direction. Thank you, Miss Missy.